Hi, I am outside today enjoying the really nice weather. It's actually Monday. I'm making my second video of the day because something happened. So today we're going to take a little bit of a break from the narrative of the Vietnam War. Yesterday you learned about the causes of the Vietnam War, and I asked you to comment on how the Gulf of Tonkin resolution came about, whether or not the attack even happened. What do you think? We still argue about it as a nation today, but I think we need to get back to the topic of why Mr. Baker is right. The answer, of course, is oil. And for those of you who've been in class with me for a long time, you know that I've been saying a certain thing. I've been saying that economic doom, a recession, or depression of some kind was on the horizon. Since 2016, I've been saying it was going to happen in 2020 or 2021. And my only unresolved issue is what commodity that was traded in a speculative manner would be the trigger for that economic crisis. Now, if you are a professional economist watching this video, you may end up with the Titanic data problem. So let's first of all start with how you may misunderstand data. So nowadays we are all measured and charged certain amounts based on our demographics. So if you were traveling across the ocean and you were charged a certain amount for a certain class of travel, basically you may be charged a lot if your boat is likely to crash and sink. You may be charged very little if your boat is not likely to crash and sink. And this price changes based on which cabins you're in, the class you're traveling. Let's consider the Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic. And it turns out that the second and third class passengers were actually locked into their hallways, and they were not allowed out while the first class passengers got onto the boat. Well, the pure mathematical evaluation of this suggests that since the first class passengers survived, then it is safer traveling first class. And that fails, that's just the raw numbers of it. It creates a correlation with no understanding of causation. So in the social studies, we are often concerned about those difficult to quantify elements, like the story of locking the second and third class passengers away from being able to get on the lifeboats in an equitable manner. So someone's calling me. Oh, it's Austin. Hi, Austin. You're in my video. Okay, bye. And Austin, if you're watching this, I will always answer the phone instead of continue my video. So the concern we have about data sets is that we have to understand the causation and correlation differences in those data sets. Now, this is a high school level explanation. It is also not an explanation that professional economists would use. This is the social studies discussion about the Great Depression and other economic crises. So here's how it goes. We know that in 1819 that there was a panic. Of course, the word panic is derived from the process through which individuals rush to the bank, they take out their money, and their emotional state, the panic they feel, actually causes the bank to collapse because everyone thinks my money's not going to be there. And then they all go try to take it out, which causes the money not to be there. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy based on the expectation and fear that the consumer has. So in 1819, of course, the commodity that was speculated on was land. And that land speculation drove up the price until someone was left holding an overpriced piece of land, or many people were left holding an overpriced piece of land that they couldn't sell. And if they can't sell it, the bank doesn't get their money back, And the bank doesn't have any interest in taking that land because it's overpriced and they can't sell it at a profit. So they're going to take a loss. And it's not necessarily that triggers the problem. The bank could have survived that, but this knowledge that the bank wasn't going to get their money back caused investors and depositors to go try to grab their money and make it liquid rather than theoretical in the bank, because the bank uses your money to loan out to other people to do a lot of things. And then the bank recoups that over time through payments. So in 1819, there was a wave of bank failures. And it was made worse by government choices. We know that in 1837, there was another panic that was precipitated again by the speculation on land. The Second Bank of the United States was no longer in existence, so federal regulations basically federal oversight was gone from lending. Wildcat banks loaned money recklessly, and land was speculated on again that had been taken from Indians in Georgia and other places. So we get to 1893 and find another panic, and it was railroads this time. In 1893, railroads were speculated on, and eventually the banks, were afraid they weren't going to get their money. The word got out, and it was a laissez-faire economic environment, and so a lack of government regulation contributed to that as well. So over time, we find a variety of similar instances. Laissez-faire economic environment, a commodity that was speculated upon, a lack of government liquidity. In each case, the government had spent money on something and didn't have a lot of money to not prevent, but deal with the emerging crisis. And in 1829 is the event we're mostly familiar with, and that is the Great Depression. The Great Depression, of course, was triggered by the speculation on stock. Well, I say that, but it's so complicated. If you've been in my class, there's a variety of causes for the Great Depression. And ultimately, the run on the banks started to trigger a Midwest series of bank failures. And so it was a panic. Again, public perception played a huge role in driving banks out of business. We talked about the lending and loaning on margin, about how the Iowa stock foreclosure auction went, the lack of proper government oversight. It was a laissez-faire environment in the 20s, of course. So I'm not going to cover all that ground again. But for those of you who have Edmodo, you can go to the slides and refresh yourself on that. And in 2008, we find, again, the end of the Bush era with a laissez-faire environment. The Glass-Steagall Act had been eliminated, and so there was no longer government regulation to prevent certain lending problems. And it was the mortgage industry that saw where we saw these problems emerge in 2008. And so, of course, laissez-faire environment, commodity speculated upon. Smoot-Hawley tariff, not tariff. Let me back up just a second. Government choices, commodity, public perception. Those three things are going to be contributing factors. In 2008, we find all the same triggers there. I'd like to move on to today. We are currently in a period of laissez-faire government regulation, a lack of regulation. In fact, we've largely gutted all the regulation. Earlier in one of the videos, I described how we're weakening the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There's so many government interventions to prevent problems now that are going away that we are a little bit in the economic Wild West. And we have seen, of course, complicating factors in our world about the coronavirus, but you should check and see what happened to oil. Today, for the first time in history, U.S. oil futures plummeted below $0. And that doesn't mean that oil is selling for $0. It means that you really don't want to bet on the near-term future of U.S. oil. I posted an article on Facebook. You can Google it yourself on what it means to have oil futures below zero. But I think for my students that have known me since 2016, the answer for what commodity that is speculated on will create a public perception that is unmanageable by certain lending institutions, I think that answer is going to be oil. Now, we are a very connected world today. I think one of the challenges in the lack of, so you remember that during the Panic of 1837, the federal bank wasn't around to deal with it. Jackson had paid down the federal debt, so he didn't have a lot of liquid money. In the Great Depression, we had paid off our debt, all the debt for World War I, and we didn't have a whole lot of liquidity. So I would argue that the stimulus package that is being delivered as I speak creates a problem in the future, in that how much can the government actually borrow? Well, that's hopefully limited. I don't want our government taking on more debt. No one does. But how much can they do now that they've tried to deal with the coronavirus issue? So the coronavirus stimulus package in this instance can be seen in the same way as paying off World War I, paying off the War of 1812 debt, and paying. So the challenges, I think, are very similar to what we've seen in the past. I don't mean to be of the voice of doom and gloom, but I just know that in the context of what we've looked at in class, I think we now have a bit of closure to my prophecy of short-term challenges. I'm hopeful that you do go online and you look up U.S. oil futures and see what happened. It is a historic event. This is one of the times in our country where a thing happened for the first time. And hopefully you gain a greater understanding of what that means for us in the future. Hope you enjoyed this. And if you weren't one of my students and you made it this far, you probably have a lot of questions, understandably. Have a good day.